UFC Fight Night, Dolidze versus Imavov. The UFC is at the Apex this weekend for a pretty solid card. Definitely one that kind of makes sense that it's at the Apex, but definitely some very interesting matchups sprinkled into this one. Of course, with that big middleweight contender matchup as the main card. I'm going to go through and break down each of these fights and provide my predictions for each of the matchups. Let's get right into it, starting with a heavyweight matchup between Thomas Petersen and Jamal Pogues. Petersen is 8-1 overall, making his UFC debut. He's the minus 170 favorite. Pogues is 1-1 in the UFC and is the plus 140 underdog. Petersen won his Dana White Contender Series matchup versus Chandler Cole pretty decisively. Cole definitely did not look like the highest level opponent, but Petersen did what he had to do. He's surprisingly athletic. He comes from a wrestling background, so he's got really strong grappling, and he's also just really strong, and I think deceptively quick as well. We've seen a guy like Jamal Pogues have trouble with grapplers in the case of his matchup versus Mitch Parkin. Petersen is definitely not as big as Mitch Parkin, but he's quite a bit quicker. Pogues definitely has a big body. He's going to have the height and reach advantage, and if he lands, anything can happen. But I think Petersen has a distinct enough advantage to justify picking him to win this one by decision. I think he'll be able to grapple his way to a victory in this one and rely on just superior conditioning. Both did not look great on the scales today, though. Our next matchup is a lightweight fight between Landon Quiñones, who is 7-2-1 overall, 0-1 in the UFC. He's a plus 115 underdog, and he's taking on Marquel Mederos, who's a minus 135 favorite, and he is 8-1 overall, making his UFC debut here. Landon Quiñones, I first got introduced to him through The Ultimate Fighter, where he lost pretty decisively to Jason Knight, and you could really just kind of tell that the skill gap between the two was significant. As soon as it went to the ground, the fight was pretty much over. Jason Knight had submitted him. So it definitely seems like he wasn't really ready for that high level of competition just yet. His opponent in this one, Marquel Mederos, is honestly not too experienced either. He's 8-1 overall, and he's looked good in his fights, but hasn't really fought the highest competition yet. We've definitely seen Landon Quiñones take on the tougher guys, such as Nasrat Haqparast, who he lost to in his most recent fight. Mederos seems to be the more powerful and consistent striker of the two. I'm going to take him by decision, but we've definitely seen a lot of money come in on Landon Quiñones as of late. I think the line opened a bit wider, and it's shrinking, so should be an interesting one. I'm still going to take Mederos by decision. I think he'll have a little bit of a power advantage that will play out in this one. Our next fight is a flyweight matchup between Luana Carolina and Yulia Stoliarenko. Carolina is 3-2 in her last 5 and is a plus 125 underdog. Stoliarenko is the minus 150 favorite and is 2-3 in her last 5. Stoliarenko coming off of a submission win over Meatball Molly, who we'll be seeing later on in this breakdown. She is honestly one of the last true one-trick ponies in the UFC. It's really armbar or bust for her, but she's really good at getting that done. I think she has something like 8 armbar wins in her career out of her 10 or 11 total wins. She's just got a knack for locking those in, and I'm not sure Luana Carolina has really dealt with something like that in the past. We've seen Luana struggle or have some suspect grappling in the past. She is coming off of a pretty decisive win over an undefeated Ivana Petrovic, but Stoliarenko just comes in with a really unique background and approach, and I kind of like her specialization. I'm going to take Stoliarenko to win this one by submission, armbar, obviously. I'll say in the second round. The next matchup we have here is a featherweight fight between JeongYeong Lee and Blake Bilder. Lee is the minus 135 favorite here. He's 1-0 in the UFC. Bilder is the plus 115 dog, and he is 1-1 in the UFC. Pretty interesting matchup here between two prospects. JeongYeong Lee is the younger guy. Blake Bilder's in his early 30s. So both definitely have a lot of fights ahead of them in their career. Bilder is coming off of a KO loss to Kyle Nelson, who, really just kind of the experience gap in that one really showed itself. Nelson won the fight on the feet, surprisingly, but he had a bit of a reach advantage in that one. And Kyle Nelson, like, say what you want, the guy wins, just about two out of every 3 fights he has. So he's a tough draw for a guy who's pretty young in his UFC career in Blake Bilder. Still, Blake is very well-rounded. He's got a lot of power in his hands and pretty good grappling. JeongYeong Lee, on the other hand, he is not as well-rounded, I'd say. He's got really good striking, fast hands, and he's not a guy you want to get into a kickboxing match with, but we saw him get totally out-grappled, out-hustled by his opponent Yi Jia in his UFC debut. I think Bilder is the more well-rounded guy. I think he's got more tools and is just more ways to win here. I think Bilder wins a decision. Our next matchup is a welterweight fight between Themba Gorimbo and Pete Rodriguez. Gorimbo is 1-1 in the UFC. He's the minus 245 favorite. Pete Rod is also 1-1 and is a plus 200 underdog. Everybody loves Gorimbo. You probably know him best as the guy who's boys with The Rock, and The Rock bought him a house because he has a really incredible story of perseverance, coming to America kind of with nothing, sleeping on the gym floor. The guy's really had a pretty incredible run, just even getting into the UFC in the first place. Themba is, pretty well-rounded. He's really long, tall guy, and he's got good grappling. Okay on the feet, but, we saw him sort of have issues in his fights, like in his debut versus AJ Fletcher on the feet. Pete Rodriguez is a much younger fighter here. I think he's 26, 27. He lost his debut to JDM, but rebounded with a KO against Mike Jackson. Mike Jackson, obviously the guy who faced CM Punk. He's only got 6 pro fights, not very experienced at all, but Pete Rodriguez is very dangerous. I think all of his wins are by KO, and he's, pretty explosive. I'm really liking the value we're getting from Pete Rodriguez here. I think he can make it interesting with his power. The size difference is going to be stark. Themba's going to be a lot longer, but I think if Pete Rodriguez can work his way on the inside, he actually has some pretty slick striking. He lost to JDM, but I actually think JDM is one of the best prospects in the world in the division, and he actually did land some pretty clean shots on him despite getting knocked out. I think Rodriguez wins a KO upset here. He's my dog of the week. Lock it in. Next up, we have a flyweight fight between Azat Maksum and Charles Johnson. Maksum is 1-0 in the UFC. He's the minus 200 favorite. Johnson's a plus 170 underdog. He is 2-3 in his last 5 fights. Johnson is on a 3-fight skid. He's a guy who's always a tough draw at 125, but has just had a rough go of it. And he's taking on a guy in Maksum here who's undefeated, 17-0. Had a razor close debut to Tyson Nam. And while he did win that fight, I think you definitely could have scored it for Tyson Nam. I probably scored it for Nam. Still, he got the win. He still has that undefeated 17-0 record, and he's really humming right now. I think it's just going to be a tough matchup for Charles Johnson, even just psychologically here. Like, Maksum has all the advantage, never been defeated, and Charles Johnson's lost a lot as of late. I think Maksum wins a decision here, but we could definitely see a different Charles Johnson in this fight, because he definitely could be fighting for his UFC career, trying to avoid that 4-fight skid. So excited for that one. Maksum by decision is going to be the pick still. Next up, we have a strawweight fight between Meatball Molly. She's 3-2 in her last 5 fights. She's the minus 270 favorite. She's taking on Diana Belbita, who is 2-3 in her last 5, plus 220 underdog. Molly's on a 2-fight skid here, back-to-back submission losses. Most recently to Stoliarenko. We know McCann doesn't have very good jiu-jitsu, But Diana Belbita is not really that jiu-jitsu threat. She's got 0 submission wins in the UFC. McCann's stronger. I think she hits a lot harder, and she's making her strawweight debut, and she looked really good on the scales. I think that's always an important thing to consider when debuting at a new weight class, and it looks like she did it the right way. I think McCann finds a KO here, gets Diana to sort of trade punches with her, and if that happens, I think Molly drops her. So Molly KO is the pick. I'll say in the 3rd round. Our next fight we have is a welterweight matchup between Gilbert Urbina and Charles Radtke. Urbina is 1-1 in the UFC. He's a -210 favorite. Radtke is 1-0 in the UFC and is the +175 underdog. Urbina fought Sean Brady in a 2018 loss. But since then, we know what Sean Brady has come on to become. He's right there with the top contenders at 170. Urbina is definitely, he's a big, strong guy, very dangerous. He lost the Ultimate Fighter finale to, did he lose it to, oh no, I'm fumbling, look at this. Hold on. Don't say I never fact-checked. Brian Battle, he lost to in the finals. He lost to Tresean Gore previously in the Ultimate Fighter competition as well. But Gilbert Urbina, he was kind of a highly touted prospect, and I think for good reason. Super dangerous striker, and he's a guy who's going in there to find a finish. Radtke went to a decision with Blood Diamond. I mean, it's kind of hard to overlook that. Blood Diamond is just so one-dimensional. He did hurt him a couple times, but I think Urbina can turn this one into a brawl, get kind of dirty, and he's just bigger, stronger. I think he finds a KO in this one over Charles Radtke. Our next fight we have is a middleweight fight between Aliaskhab, Khizriev, and Makhmud Muradov. Khizriev is 14-0 undefeated, 1-0 in the UFC. He's the -150 favorite. Muradov is the +125 underdog. Khizriev's debut was a submission win versus Denis Tiuliulin. And that was like 2 years ago. And I remember watching it and it was like, okay, this guy arrived. 2 years later, he still hasn't fought. Finally, he's back. He's a guy who's got very solid stand-up. And then, of course, really strong grappling. So, very well-rounded. Definitely a dangerous guy. He's going in there and he's looking for a finish. And, yeah, you definitely don't want to get into a wrestling match with him. Muradov, on the other hand, we kind of know what he is at this point. He's a fast starter. You look at him, and he's absolutely chiseled. He's got tremendous power, and he's super explosive. I think he's going to have the speed advantage on the feet here. And I think if Khizriev gets lulled into a brawl and starting to really fight this one on the feet, I think he'd get caught. He got caught a couple times by Denis Tiuliulin. Tiuliulin just doesn't really have the power that Muradov has. I think if Muradov finds the chin, Khizriev could get handed that first KO loss of his career. That's kind of the good with Muradov. There's obviously the bad as well. He lost as a -600 favorite to Gerald Meerschaert back in the day, despite hurting Meerschaert a few times. And then he lost to Caio Borralho and beat Brian Barberena. But still, I think Muradov KO is pretty good value. With a guy whose defense, I'd say, is pretty suspect of Khizriev. So Muradov KO is going to be the pick. If you can find the Muradov KO or Khizriev submission line, I really like that play as well. I think one of those two outcomes is probably happening. Our next fight we have is a women's flyweight fight between Viviane Araujo and Natalia Silva. Araujo is 2-3 in her last 5. She's a +280 underdog. Silva is 4-0 in the UFC, and she's a -370 favorite. This is a big step up in competition for Natalia Silva. She's had 4 fights already in the UFC. She's only 26 years old, so definitely young, up-and-comer. And she's looked dominant in each of those fights. She's very athletic. She throws hard. And I like her style. I mean, she kind of comes with a kickboxing approach. And she's got a lot left in the tank, even in these fights that went the distance. You know, you can tell that she's still throwing fast, throwing hard, and putting out a lot of volume late into fights, which I like to see. Viviane is hard to put away, though. She's only been finished once. And her losses as of late are against fighters like Alexa Grasso, Amanda Ribas, you know, established, high-level, you know, of course, in Alexa Grasso's case, champions of the division. So, you know, the question is definitely going to come up, like, what happens when Silva doesn't put Viviane away? Then how is Silva going to look? But I think we've seen you know, enough of her having success in the third round to comfortably take her to win this one by decision. So Silva decision is going to be the pick there. Next up is a welterweight fight between Randy Brown and Muslim Salikhov. Randy Brown is the minus 280 favorite in this one. He's 4-1 his last 5. Of course, that one loss being JDM. Salikhov is a plus 230 dog in here, and he is 3-2 in his last 5. I don't know about you guys. I like got deja vu, vertigo looking at this matchup. I could have swore that this fight already happened. Call it Mandela effect. I don't know what it is, but you know, let me know if that's something you've experienced as well. Regardless, I don't really see Salikhov have much of a chance here. Brown's gonna keep him at the distance, and he's got a massive reach advantage here. He knows how to fight behind a long jab, and I think he wins this one on the outside. Salikhov kind of relies too much on the spinning kicks and all that stuff, and I just don't think it's a reliable way to win for him in this one. So Randy Brown by decision is going to be the pick. Our co-main event is a really interesting lightweight matchup between Renato Moicano and Drew Dober. Two definitely interesting guys in the lightweight division here. Moicano is 3-2 in his last 5. Dober is 4-1. And Moicano is the minus 185 favorite, with Dober being the plus 155 underdog. Both of them are coming off of finishes. In Moicano's case, it was a submission win over Brad Riddell. And in Dober's case, it was a KO win over Ricky Glenn. We've seen Moicano kind of take on guys with like a similar build to Drew Dober, not to loop all those like kind of shorter, stockier guys in the division together, but you look at what Moicano was able to do against Brad Riddell and Alex Hernandez, and you know, I think he just has a lot of success when he's the taller, longer guy here. And especially in the stand-up of those fights, I mean, you saw him clip both of those guys and really hurt him. The craziest thing in my, looking up this fight was learning that Moicano has 0 career KOs. Pretty crazy because his striking, I think, is actually pretty solid, and he hurts people when he catches them. He's kind of like dollar store Charles Oliveira, I'd say. I think they have pretty similar skill sets. He's not quite the finisher that Charles is, and he doesn't get the KOs like Charles has. But both these guys are looking to put you away. Dober, on the other hand, he lost that by KO to Matt Favola in the first. I think that was the first round, and just fireworks fight, typical Dober fight there, just a scrap. But yeah, I mean, Dober, hard guy to put away, but I think Moicano's going to catch Dober coming in, and he's just going to land first. He's got that longer reach, and I think he's going to hurt him and sub him. So Moicano by submission is going to be the pick here. We'll see if he can get his arms underneath the crimson chin, though. It definitely can't be easy. Finally, we have our main event here. It is a middleweight fight between Roman Dolidze and Nasruddin Imavov. Dolidze is the plus 145 underdog here. 4-1 his last 5 fights. Imavov is 3-1-1 and is the minus 175 favorite. Dolidze is a guy who kind of exploded onto the scene in the past couple years. He got into the rankings after a 3-fight finish streak, finishing guys like Jack Hermanson and Phil Hawes. I always want to call him Spencer Hawes, like the old guy who played on the Sixers, but Phil Hawes. Most recently, he had that fight versus Marvin Vettori where It was kind of a stand-up affair, and Vettori just had the cleaner striking, and that's really what prevailed in that one. Went to a decision. I had Vettori winning that one pretty decisively, but Dolidze, with some of these other guys, he's been as fierce as a finisher as anyone. Even in the Hermansson fight, we saw him sort of getting, Hermansson was kind of doing what he does. He took Dolidze down. He was winning most of the striking exchanges and, kind of like out finessing him. And then, Dolidze gets him into this crazy like calf slicer and then is able to KO him off of it. Very impressive win. Dolidze is one of the most entertaining guys. But I think that Vettori fight could be a sign of things to come against some of these more skilled strikers in the division. And yeah, that's where Imavov comes in. He's a guy with very skilled striking. In recent fights, he took on Sean Strickland and Chris Curtis. And in that Chris Curtis fight, he was having a lot of success before, I think like an accidental headbutt turned into a no contest. But that seemed like a fight that he probably would have came out victorious in. Then, you have the Strickland fight on the other hand, where I think people kind of took a lot of stock away from Imavov because Strickland just totally put it on him and, really kind of clobbered him throughout the entire fight. It was never much of a fight after the first round or so. But, Strickland was the champ, one of the top 3 toughest guys in the division without question. So, I don't take as much away from that loss as others. Imavov's got really slick striking. He knows how to fight behind, his boxing. And he's got pretty good kicks as well. And I think he's got the takedown defense to sort of keep Dolidze off of him. Dolidze is an excellent jiu-jitsu fighter. So, I don't think Imavov's going to want to mess around with him on the ground really at all. And I think if Dolidze really tries to sell out for a takedown, I think we're going to see him gas and Imavov kind of just coast to a decision here. So Imavov by decision is going to be the pick. The longer this one goes, the more it's going to benefit Imavov. I think everyone knows that. Dolidze knows that. I could see, a scenario where Dolidze just sells out, gasses, and then, he just kind of crumples because these are big boys, and 25 minutes is a really long time. But I think Imavov's going to be pretty. I'm not going to say apprehensive, but I think he's going to take a more calculated approach in this one. He knows he needs a win because it's just been a weird few fights for him. So Imavov by decision is going to be the pick. With that, let me know, comment, and subscribe what you all think, what your picks are, and I'll catch you on the next one.